Hello, everyone. This is your 4-minute warning. Our next section will begin in 4 minutes. Hello, everyone. It is officially 1:30. We'd like to thank you all for joining us for the ULA workshop, and we'd like to turn the time over to Miranda and Nicole for our next session. Take it away, Miranda and Nicole.
Hi, everybody. So my name's Nicole. Oh, hi, my name's Nicole Beatty, and this is Miranda Kispert. And today we're going to talk about, sorry about this. Having a little trouble. Let's start over. Today we're going to talk about imagery and access using visual signage to improve resource discovery. And this is the work of Miranda and myself, but also Andrew Stapley, Holly Bowden, and Rachel Middleton from Weber State.
Nicole, I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you make it full screen? Oh, there you go. Never mind. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're fine. And so, yeah, this is the collective work that we're going to be presenting.
Your video is still on.
Okay. So imagine that you're in the library and you're a student trying to find a book. You have a call number, but these are the signs that are available to help you find your way. Which one actually helps you? Any of them? So the signs on the previous slide represent what users might see if they have low vision, a language barrier, dyslexia, or a color vision deficiency when signage isn't designed for accessibility. What the signs actually gave was the location of books with call numbers from M to T and directions to get there, as well as information and where to get help. But since they're largely unreadable, they couldn't help the intended audience. In addition to those vision and language barriers, some users may also simply be unfamiliar with call numbers or even feel ashamed to ask for assistance. And it's really hard to help people when they don't ask for help. But they shouldn't have to ask just because our signage isn't doing its job. So staff and faculty at Stewart Library developed visual low-text signage to help users locate resources. In this presentation, we will discuss our process and the research behind it to get you started on a path to a more discoverable collection.
Wayfinding refers to the psychological processes that we use when we want to orient ourselves and get to somewhere else. And it also refers to the tools that are available to help us do that. So, for example, signage. One thing that we know in wayfinding in libraries is that the difference between a novice user and an expert user, when you're referring to undergraduates, can be very slim indeed. So even, especially overconfidence in a novice user can lead them to believe they know where they're going when in fact they don't. When our students are trying to find books in the library, and when we are wayfinding, whether or not we're successful can depend on how complex this space is, right? Are they trying to navigate between floors or within one floor? Are there organizational issues or structural barriers that are preventing people from intuiting a space? Also, a user's experience or familiarity with the space, the availability and quality of wayfinding aids also impact how easily and how successfully we do the wayfinding that we try to do. Confusion over call numbers is a big problem in libraries in particular. And when it comes to giving people those wayfinding aids, people tend to agree that using signs with text and graphic information is the most helpful. One of the problems we run into when it comes to wayfinding and helping people wayfind is that even complicated spaces become familiar over time. So when you get around to making those signs, it can be hard to remember how confused you were and what the problems were that you encountered as a new user in that space. Some of the things that we run into when we're designing signs have less to do with wayfinding and more to do with best practices. And some of these might be really familiar, right? Signs that are outdated, negative, intimidating, unattractive, or overwhelming, things that are unprofessional or just posted out of desperation, right? So scrawling something on paper or something that's printed out on printer paper and taped to the wall, right? These are unattractive, unprofessional, and posted out of desperation in many cases. And students in particular have a tendency to skip or ignore that in their field of vision. If there are too many signs or not enough signs, or when there is a sign but it's not in the place that a user needs it, signs that are hard to see because they're too high or too low, or because the font is too small or difficult to read, things with too much text have a tendency to be ignored, and things that have colored fonts or graphics that aren't accessible to all of our users because the colors prevent people with color deficiency vision to see them properly, or because there's not enough color contrast. Those are all additional design problems that we run into when we are creating signs. Other things that we may run into include things like symbols aren't necessarily as universal as we may assume they are, as well as the fact that most libraries can't afford an in-house graphic designer. And even those that do may not have a formal design guidelines or best practices in place. So when we're designing signs for our libraries, we're acting in place a professional graphic designer, even if we don't think of ourselves that way. Most of us aren't trained to do that, and we don't have guidelines from our institutions. What researchers tell us is helpful, right, to accommodate and to mitigate the problems and pitfalls that we run into are to keep simple layouts, keep text as brief as possible, like just a subject, make sure that our graphics are accessible, and if we can, incorporate the classification system to give people sort of the boost in learning that comes from that. Other things include making sure that form a system, right? So when we're posting signs in our stacks, make sure that they work together to get people where they want to go, instead of just slapping up sort of band-aids as signs as band-aids when we notice a problem, and also posting them strategically. So for example, at the top of the stairs, a user might not know whether to go right or left, so that's an appropriate place and a strategic place to put a sign. But what we also know is that no matter how good our signage is, students are going to want bigger, better, updated, and better placed signage. Visual signage is really useful because it can save space, right? Sometimes a word or a picture's worth 1,000 words. It can be more efficient than just using words. It can also overcome language barriers. Even though symbols aren't necessarily universal, they can be very helpful and they can attract attention. Historically, lots of shoppers were illiterate, and so shopkeepers would use signs with an image of what was available in their store to entice or to advertise. Similarly, road signs have been used in graphics to help us figure out where to go, right? For years. Arrows, very simple graphics. Some studies have even shown that students won't pay attention to a sign with no image at all. So that's another great reason to put an image on your sign, right? Not only does it help communicate, it attracts that attention and makes sure that students are gonna notice it. And then color can be used in coding to help wayfinding, right? And it's often one of the things that study participants suggest, like, what can we do to make our signs better? Use more color.
So in considering all of these different things, we have employed universal design for learning as a theory into our signage. And universal design for learning is a framework to help make teaching and learning more inclusive. Dr. Ann Meyer, who has a PhD in education and is a licensed clinical psychologist, and Dr. David Rose, a developmental neuropsychologist and educator, started working on this concept to help improve teaching and learning. And along with David Gordon, they wrote a book called Universal Design for Learning, Theory and Practice. What they determined is that learning is a diverse process because our brains have different networks to help us interact with our environment and with information. Meyer, Rose, and Gordon highlighted 3 classes of networks that work together to enable us to learn. Our affective networks represent our emotions in learning. So in other words, these networks are the reasons that we're motivated to learn. For example, If my professor tells me I should check out a book on my topic from the library, and that book is the gem of my research topic, I might suddenly be motivated to learn how to check out a book. I'm also motivated because 1, my professor thinks the book is absolutely perfect for my research topic, and 2, that book is expected to be part of my research. So because I'm motivated, I'm likely to follow through with my task of checking out a book. The next class of networks in the brain that helps us learn is the recognition networks. This group of networks allows us to take in our environment at a rapid pace. Here we can use our senses to take in information and figure out which information we should use and which information we should disregard. And it is what I would rely on to quickly help me take in clues that may help me locate a book in the library, even if I haven't been there before. The third class of networks are the strategic networks. These networks allow us to formulate a plan based on our motivations and our surroundings. All of these networks play a role in how we engage with a specific task, such as finding a book in the library. In terms of our visual signage project, each of these classes of networks are processing information together, which increases a person's strategies for wayfinding and navigation. This can be explained in looking at how the visual signs work with the framework for universal design in terms of engagement, representation, and action and expression. So with engagement, it refers to ensuring that people are motivated and interested to learn. In creating visual signage for the stacks, from what we've learned so far, the images themselves promote engagement with finding and navigating the stacks. This is because the images can get people to the right sections of the stacks and inspire them to look to the Library of Congress call numbers on their phones, or if they're carrying them in their hands on paper, and figure out how the books are organized. So here they would be making connections between the visual signs and the schema. This allows people to scaffold the information presented to them in the stacks. First, people engage with the images on the signs. Then they connect those images with a letter. Next, they connect the letter to the call number. And finally, they begin to understand how the call number ranges work. With representation, this means finding different ways to present information or content. And this is done by using symbols or images to reflect the various sections of the Library of Congress schema. And with action and expression, this involves strategic goals for people to employ different tools for wayfinding in the stacks and tie images to the call number rangefinders, and ultimately find materials in which they are searching for. This may also be a way of promoting browsing by section, even without call numbers, which is expressed in action of engagement through representation. Additionally, universal design techniques were employed because patrons need different access points to navigate a library, especially one with structural challenges.
So in the Stewart Library at Weber State, we have a couple of special challenges, and I'm sure we're not alone. For example, our stacks are arranged in an S or serpentine shape. So the main stairs where one reaches the floor where the collection is located are in the middle of the floor, and one would have to turn left to get to the part of the collection that houses A through G call numbers, or right to reach H through Z. And you can see here, based on the arrows, if one goes to the A through G section, it moves from west to east, and then the user literally hits a wall. One of our participants in the study this past couple of weeks stopped there and said, "Where are the books? Where do they go?" And what you have to do then to reach the next set of books is to literally make a U-turn, cross back over the middle of the building to the north end, and then move back to that blue section where H through M is along the east wall, just to the left of the stairs. And another problem that we encounter then is that because the arrangement of books goes in this S shape, we're now going from east to west. if you want to go up the alphabet rather than east or west to east, excuse me. And so you'll see that this pattern keeps repeating. There are frequent direction changes, as well as these separate areas that books are located, and that can be really confusing for our users. Another problem that we have are these structural barriers, right? These pillars and columns. These square pillars you see in the picture on the left, but right up to the end caps in some of these areas, and they're much narrower than the end caps. So that means standardizing our signs is difficult because what fits in other places just doesn't fit there. You can see how we had to bend them around the corners of the pillars to make them fit. On the right-hand side, you see these round columns that are scattered throughout the building, and these are structural. They are holding up the roof, so we can't exactly get rid of them. But working around them is a challenge. And you can see here how this one is covering the rangefinder that is on the end of that end cap. It cannot be seen. And so in this case, our stacks manager just had to tape the ranges that are available on that stack to the outside of the column. So not only is that unprofessional and a little bit unattractive, it also means that that standardization that one would expect isn't available. One of the other problems we have is that we recently renovated our library, and while that's all well and good, when the furniture was moved back in, end caps and shelving came from different areas of the pre-renovation library, and those different areas had wayfinding tools and rangefinders mounted at different heights on the end caps. And so once again, in terms of that standardization and where people expect to see things, we run into problems there because they're no longer standardized within an area or throughout the collection.
So to address this, we employed our design process, and we're going to talk a little bit about that right now. So this is where our symbols are right now. And we have a black and white set of images, which you can see here, and we also have a color set of images. This set symbolizes our general collection, which is our circulating collection. The Stewart Library also includes several collections outside of the general collection, and these include microfilm, media, and oversized. They also include a curriculum and young people's collection, which incidentally is classed by the Dewey Decimal System. And then we also have government documents, and these are the symbols that we have for those.
We started out using the system that had been designed earlier at Pellissippi State Community College. And the project that we had at that time, and again, this was an ongoing project with Jennifer Mezek and Laurel Winters there, and we asked a class of graphic design students to design these symbols for us because we theorized that symbols designed by students for students would be more useful than symbols designed by librarians, because we have a tendency to come at things from a library perspective, which most people don't have. And so we wanted to get their take on what these things might refer to or might represent. And so we got this really great set of symbols, and it was overall really promising. But we decided at Weber State that we wanted to start with that and then move forward. And so we started our project by doing a survey to ask people what they thought these symbols were supposed to do and see how well they recognize them. And so we sent out a survey which essentially showed the entire collection, including these ones we designed for our additional collections, the young people's and so on, and gave them a topic or a subject heading and said, which symbol do you think best matches this topic? And we broke up the set into 5 sections so that no one participant would have to take too long or have too many symbols to match. And then with each group of symbols, we sent half of them out with the Library of Congress class letter and half without, to see if that had an impact on how well people recognized the symbol. And overall, we got 487 responses, about 90 to 100 per group. And we looked for a 60% or better recognition rate to get a sense of which symbols were working and which ones needed to be improved. For example, here you see the young people's collection. 88.4% of the people to identify which symbol they thought was meant to match the young people, identified that one as the one they thought was the best match. However, for social sciences, we asked people which symbol they thought was the best match for that one, and only 4% of our respondents chose that symbol. And we ascertained that that was partly because nobody could tell what that symbol was supposed to be. It's a bar chart, but it's not very obvious. And so people looked for symbols that had a person in them, right, to get at the social aspect of it. Or people looked for things that might represent science. And so most people missed that one. Similarly, the image for language and literature is a book, and it's pretty recognizable. But there are so many topics that could be represented by a book, or so many other symbols that could possibly represent language and literature, that only 8% of our respondents identified that symbol as the one for language and literature. I also found that only in rare instances did having that call number help people identify the symbol, because most people aren't familiar with that. Things like GOV for government documents were helpful, however. We also got some free-form comments back when we solicited comments that were really, really useful in our redesign process. For example, one participant said, "George Washington with his face blacked out is off-putting, and nothing with guns and swords if possible, please." And those were things we hadn't thought about before the survey, and so we were glad to have that input so we could revise our symbols to things that people were more comfortable with, and also that did a better job of representing the collection. Our next step was to start the redesign process. And so here are some examples of changes we made as a result of the survey. So for example, for the social sciences, we changed that bar chart to something that we hoped would sort of elicit a sense of social and science, right? For general works and A, we changed it from a sort of random to a picture of what is actually our library, kind of represented graphically. And for United States history, opted for an image of, in fact, the United States. And military science, we chose dog tags instead. Our next step was to have some focus groups. And we did that in the summer of 2019. And we had a total of 4 focus groups with about 30 participants. And we did some similar kinds of questions. So we put up the whole set of symbols using ones and asked, which do you think is supposed to match this topic? And then there were a couple of symbols where we knew that there was a lot of confusion and we wanted to find out more about that. So we'd put 2 or 3 symbols on the screen and say, out of these ones, which is the best match for this topic? And similarly, as we were working on the redesign, sometimes we weren't sure which direction would be best in terms of what kind of symbol might work. And so we put those up on the screen and said, which ones are the best match, which work best? And in terms of cohesiveness for this set, we wanted more information on that as well. And so we asked, which sets do you prefer? And sort of gave different options for how they could be combined into a set. And that was all really illuminating as well. For example, on the one that we were so proud of with the library, we got comments that, first of all, they couldn't tell what it was. And second, if they could, they didn't know it was the library because they would come in the other entrance most often, or because they would go out that way but not come in. And so we decided that was definitely going to be one of the ones we needed to revise again. With the social sciences, we got questions like, is it supposed to be hangman or is it a computer chip? Which, again, were very illuminating and told us where we needed to put our work. Some of the revisions we made after that, yes. So we took that library building, the general works, and made it a little more basic and generalized it quite a bit so that it was less specific to our collection, but more recognizable. For the United States history, we took that blacked out US outline and put the states into it, right? Because we were told that that was what our participants had preferred as an image. And then for the social sciences, we took out the computer chip and we tried to make it look a little more like an organism or a network, right? So we kept that social aspect of it and added a little bit to it. So we made overall about 17 revisions or additions based on the focus group feedback, including 7 that we had previously redesigned. So that was really good input from our users.
Additionally, we designed a visual signage color palette, and these colors were chosen based on the university's brand color palette. Rachel Middleton, our graphic designer, tried to pick the best colors within the brand color palette to address color blindness and print and web accessibility. So in trying to address differences in color vision, Rachel created simulations of what our colors would look like if people had deuteranopia or protanopia, which are 2 common types of color blindness. And while the colors changed, the shades could still be distinguishable as different. However, we did not take into consideration that purple, being a mix of red and blue, can often look blue to someone with red sensitivity. And that would be someone who has protanopia. And this is exactly what happened when I tested our color palette with my husband, Jim, who has protanopia. So additionally, after printing out the color signs, we realized that the purples are too close in terms of shade to be distinguishable, and that even the teal may look similar to the blue. So going forward, we would like to work with color universal design more, and hopefully that will help us better understand what colors may work better for people with low color vision. Color universal design is user-oriented and has been developed in consideration of people with various types of color vision to allow information to be accurately conveyed to as many individuals as possible. Rachel would also like to use WebAIM, a website that will test the contrast of the colors for web accessibility when we go to put the color scheme and the symbols on the website. And I would also like to research more about color vision and do more testing with the colors in terms of people who have low color vision or even low vision. And I think that would definitely help make our palette more inclusive.
When we started to draft the signs, we weren't really sure what we wanted, but we knew some things we wanted to include on the signs. And so we gave Rachel, our graphic designer, just very basic initial instructions. They were really quite vague. And we basically said, please include the symbol, the letter of the class that it represents, the subject heading, and space for 3 or 4 subheadings. And those were based loosely on the signs that we developed at Pellissippi, which you can see here. However, what I realized was that I had not done my job. I did not give Rachel enough information to do her job. And so after we got the first draft back, I put together a new spreadsheet that could help help her really see what we needed. And we gave her feedback on that draft as well, so that she could give us what we were looking for. So my spreadsheet for her broke things down in a very basic manner, but in a specific manner as well, so that she knew exactly what Library of Congress class would go with each letter, and then what color each symbol should be for that sign, because we wanted to break the signs up and the symbols up by the physical location in the library to help color code those for our users. So Rachel and I met via Zoom to discuss all these things, and I showed her how the spreadsheet worked and answered her questions. And after that, she made revisions to that draft, and we really liked what she came up with. And I actually went back after she made those templates, and I was the one who added the headings and the subheadings to the signs before they were printed. So when we, these are the signs that she came up with. And again, we really liked how they came out. So she employed minimal text wherever possible and used color coding to group collections by floor on the larger wayfinding signs. And on the end cap signs, we used text alignment to indicate which side of the shelf, and sign placement as well, to indicate which side of a shelf a user should look for the book that they're hunting for. We also decided to do only one symbol per sign, rather than on a range where 2 or more subjects might be shelved, rather than try to fit 2 symbols on a sign, but to give each one its own space and then stack them vertically on the end cap. And all of these were printed in-house by Alex Park, who's our digital collections and exhibits assistant, and her team in digital collections. When it came to choosing what text to put on the signs, this was a little more complicated than I initially anticipated that it would be. And Andrew Stapley, who is a member of our team, culled all the subclasses from the Library of Congress classification outlines at loc.gov and plugged them into this spreadsheet. And then I went through, and according to what was on a given range, chose the ones that I thought would best represent our collection and our students' needs, as well as in some places combined elements, right? So that they would fit on one line where they were really similar, or where they could be sort of grouped. And then in some cases chose one heading that might represent another. For example, here you see finance and public finance. And I opted to use finance because I felt it could represent both of those. And in other places, there were issues of representation or outdated terminology that needed to be addressed, or that could profitably be addressed. So choosing those subject headings was an interesting experiment, and moving forward, we would definitely want to check in with our subject librarians to make sure that their topic areas are represented the way their students need.
So in doing that, we also are going to take into consideration the results of our user testing. So one of the big plans we had was to do a whole lot of user testing with different folks, including students and faculty, but COVID-19 came and disrupted our plans. And we ended up having to submit a whole entire new IRB because we had to update our safety protocols and also get approval for those. So we ended up testing a limited number of participants. We only had 8, and it turned out we had 7 because one of them didn't show up. But the tests were done when the library was closed, and each participant and investigator had masks and gloves that was required. We used a lot of hand sanitizer in the 2 days that we did the testing, and bleach wipes to sanitize touch points and objects that were shared between participants. And we had tasks that the students had to retrieve books, and so we had to make sure that the books that they retrieved were 2 to 3 shelves apart, and any books that they removed from the shelves had to be quarantined for 24 hours after the testing. And we also used the library chat tool to deliver the demographic survey link that the participants took, as well as the book finding tasks, so that we could avoid touching paper. The participants also had to sign an informed consent, and that was updated to include a COVID-19 notice, and it was also quarantined after signing. So in testing the signs, we had one group, the first group, they were tested as a baseline, so they didn't actually have the signs in place. Then the next week, we tested a second group where the signs were in place. And as I said, each participant in both groups had to complete 2 tasks, and those included finding a book in a subject area, such as nursing, which would simulate browsing, and finding a known item by call number. All of the participants were shadowed and timed, and a brief exit interview was conducted with the participants. And the first participants got 5 questions, which you can see here, and then the second set of participants on the second day who had the signs, they had 2 additional questions. We also tested our bump point signs, and what we realized is that due to the large amount of COVID-19 signs in the library, people didn't pay attention to the larger signs, which actually explained the symbols and the colors that might have helped direct them a little bit better. And we also learned that we have competing signage in our stacks. And if you notice the second end cap, you'll see that the signs are moved down lower. And so this causes a problem because sometimes people don't look down below, say, their knees. But this gives you kind of an example of what the signs do look like in the stacks.
So the results turned out to be really interesting. The first, when we looked at the browsing tasks, the time with no signs was significantly longer than the time with the signs. So that proved really useful to a lot of our users, right? Because they could sort of browse for the subject area that they were looking for and then navigate to that area. The users, or the participants who were tested with no signs as the baseline, almost all of them went to the catalog to look up the topic and find a book with a call number they could use to locate the area for browsing, right? Rather than just looking for the area. One participant who looked for United States history did misinterpret the call numbers to begin with and assume that they were relevant to or referred to topics. And so that participant went to the U section to try to find United States. And when that didn't work, went to the H section to look for history. And when that failed, this participant went to ask for help at the reference desk, which we had explained at the beginning was allowed. They could use any of the tools that would be available to a student during open hours. And so that participant went and got help, and the person we had stationed there explained how the call numbers work, and that they needed to go to the E section. And so they were eventually successful. The person that was looking for the nursing book ended up giving up because they deeply overthought the task that we had set for them. And it was pretty clear that their research process would not include browsing under most circumstances. And so we gave that person a second chance and a little bit of coaching. And after that, they were able to use the catalog to find the section for that. But with the signs, the participants did not notice the large format signs because of all the COVID signs, except for the last participant. After I had moved all the COVID signs far away, they noticed that bump point sign and actually used it. But they had a much easier time with the browsing tasks. The results for the item finding task were also really interesting. It turned out that our participants on the first day for the baseline were really very familiar with using call numbers. And that was very clear when they went to find their books and had very little trouble with it. However, the people that came in for the second round of testing with the signs, it was very evident that they did not have comfort or familiarity with call numbers. And so even though we gave them the title, author, and call number of the book they were supposed to find, they almost all went straight to the catalog computer to look up the book to try to find more information, particularly where in the library they could find it, not realizing that the call number was a clue for that. But even though they had so little understanding of the call number system and of how the library is organized, every single one of them succeeded in their task. They all found the book that we asked them to find. It may take a while, but they got there. And that by itself was really telling to us, because the signs enabled them to find what they were looking for, even though they didn't know how to do it. So that was really interesting information. And it was also really neat as an observer to watch them, as Nicole mentioned earlier, make those connections between the call number in their hand and the subject on the sign, and the subject with the call number on the sign, and the call number on the sign with the rangefinder above it. And every single one of them was able to eventually make these connections and navigate to where the book was located. So that was really interesting information to find. One thing we did hear, though, in our open-ended exit interviews was that none of the participants noticed the colors on the signs as color coding. So that's one of the things that we'll need to address in our next steps.
So in terms of our next steps, we want to make sure that we finalize our symbols with our graphic designer. We also want to make sure that our color palette is more accessible, and we eliminate the two purples. You can see them on the larger sign here and how very close they are in terms of the shades of purple that are used. We want to increase the size of the "where should I look," hoping that will call attention to those signs. And we'd also like to add call number terminology. And we're going to incorporate a "you are here" graphic into the wayfinding and bump point signs, because a lot of times people get turned around in the library and they don't exactly know where they are. So I think that would help. And then we're going to make the arrows on the signs easier to see and follow, and also make the end cap signs smaller, because a lot of them were too big because we have the different sized end caps. And then we're going to confirm the subject headings with the subject librarians. On our wish list, we'd like to do a one-year trial run where we place the final drafts of the signs on the end caps and all the bump points we'd like to reduce the non-navigational signs and notices in the library so we don't have so many competing signs because it gets overwhelming. We'd also like to add the symbols to the library catalog records and our database descriptions. And then additionally, we'd like to do a couple other studies. So one for low color vision or low vision to test our color palettes, and another observational study to see how students and staff and faculty all interact with the signs. And then we'd like to survey our library staff to see if the signs help people find things in the library easier. And we'd also like to survey the non-library faculty, so the teaching faculty, to see if the signs actually help them find things easier. And after the trial run, we will make any changes that need to be made, and then we'll try to get the final versions of the symbols and sign designs to be available under Creative Commons licensing. So in the image here with Science Direct College Edition, you can see where we've added the science symbol next to the motorboard, and they come out pretty good. I'd like to see them be a little bit more brighter, but it gives you an idea of what it might look like in our database descriptions. Do you have any questions?
There is one question,
Okay.
and it says, to use WebAIM to check for protanopia, do you just upload a document and they apply a filter to your file to see how it would look? And the answer there is, we're not sure, at least I'm not. Rachel used it. Nicole, do you know more than that?
I know that there's a color contrast feature in it, but yeah, I don't know exactly how it works. But we could definitely ask Rachel, and if you want to send us your contact information, we can try to find out for you.
And we did include the link there earlier in the slides, and the slides will be available later, I believe. But we're happy to email it if you have interest in that. But unfortunately, I haven't used WebAIM very much. That was our graphic designers thing, but we do plan to get more involved with that end of things. Are there other questions?
It might take just a minute for people to type things in. We've noticed in our past sessions, so if you just give them a quick minute.
More than fair. We did include, oh, here's two questions coming in. Have you found other accessibility issues other than color blindness? Do you have plans for things like large print and hanging the signs at a height to be wheelchair accessible? Those are great questions. And we have considered things like font size. But in terms of where to hang the signs and yeah, in terms of how high they're hung, they're mostly not higher than about 4 or 5 feet to fit under the rangefinders that we have. But that's another really good point, and that's also something that we would want to make sure to address when we do post those signs for our users. Next question is, with color contrast, even just putting it in grayscale can give you a sense of the differences there are. Yes, and that was one of the things on that first slide when we showed the red on black, which most people don't use because it's not at all easy to read. But when you saw that in the grayscale, it really impacts how well you can differentiate that. One of the issues with color contrast, I think, is that it's not just for people with no color vision. It's also an issue for people with some color vision or with a color vision deficiency. And so some colors will have, for example, the red and the green, right? They may come out in different scales of gray, but might pull out a blue or a red instead. That makes it difficult to see. So addressing all of those at once can get complicated. Linda, what great work. Thanks for sharing all your research and findings. Your stacks definitely warrant some extra help in finding aids. Yes, they do.
Yes, they do.
Thing we wanted to have when our building was designed. Straight lines of stacks. It helps a lot. No dead ends. Yes, if I had my druthers, I think my library would be about a mile long and 5 feet wide. But unfortunately, that was not an option when it was renovated. Yeah, I was not consulted when they put those in that serpentine pattern. But thank you, Linda. That's very kind. We did include resources and some further reading at the end of the slides. So that'll be available to anybody who has an interest in the topic or wants to pursue it. And there's not a lot of research on this topic, but it's growing. It's a growing field. So that's kind of exciting.
So there are currently no questions in the Q&A. If you want to get your last few questions in, we do have a few more minutes. Do we want to give them just a couple more minutes to type in their last questions, ladies?
Sure.
Lovely. We'll wait for oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say I definitely want to give a shout out to the other people on our team. Andrew Stapley was extremely useful in helping out with the stack arrangements. Will the slides be available after this class? Yes, this is going to be, the video will be available. Liz, do you know whether the slides are going to be separate or only combined?
We can put a link to download the slides in the same place that you will be able to watch the video afterwards.
Fantastic. So that's a definite yes there. So yeah, Andrew Stapley was instrumental in getting the data and everything for actually making the signs. Holly's expertise of the classification systems was important as well. And of course, Rachel with her graphic design skills. We could not have done any of this without Rachel. So we're very fortunate to have her working with us.
All right, ladies. Well, it doesn't look like there are any other questions coming in. Unless you'd like to wait around for a little bit longer, I think that we're good.
I see the participants slowly dropping. Do you have any questions for us?
Liz?
I think we're good. Thank you both for a great presentation.
Thank you so much for having us. It was an honor.
And thank you.
Thanks, ladies.
Bye.
All right, so you're welcome to stay on if you are participating in our next session, and that will start at promptly at 2:45.